Hello history buffs, time travelers, and scholars. Ancient Persia was known for its powerful empire and harsh punishments. When someone broke the law, the punishments could be cruel and terrifying. From brutal executions to painful tortures, these punishments were meant to keep order and strike fear into the people. Let's dive into some of the most gruesome punishments in ancient Persia. The ancient Persian Empire, ruling through cruel punishments. The Persian Empire, which lasted for nearly 2,500 years, was ruled by several powerful dynasties and extended across much of the ancient world. The Persian rulers were known not only for their military strength, but also for their strict laws and harsh methods of maintaining order. Punishments in ancient Persia were severe and often involved public displays of pain to serve as a warning to others. Lying, for instance, was considered one of the worst crimes and could lead to a painful death, often after prolonged torture. The Persians believed that punishment was a form of questioning, where the guilty were forced to confess, and death could follow if they were unable to reveal the truth. One of the most terrifying forms of punishment was flaying, or skinning a person alive. This method was used for severe crimes, and could be done in stages, causing excruciating pain over time. Some criminals were first blinded, then stripped of their skin, and left to die. In some cases, the skin was removed in strips, which would lead to death through heart failure or infections from the wounds. Other punishments included amputation, where thieves or beggars could have their hands cut off, or even being blinded by sharp instruments. Those who were guilty of lesser crimes might be whipped, with up to 10,000 lashes given over several days. These brutal methods of punishment were not just a way to enforce the law, but to demonstrate the power and control of the rulers over their subjects. Through such harsh and often grotesque acts, the ancient Persians ensured their empire's dominance while instilling fear throughout their vast territory. One chilling example comes from the punishment of a corrupt judge. When a judge was sentenced to death, his skin was removed and used to upholster the chair of the new judge, the son of the man who had been executed. This gruesome reminder kept the new judge aware of the consequences of dishonesty and corruption, ensuring he stayed loyal to the empire's laws. The Persians also had a terrifying method of execution involving ashes. In one form of this punishment, a prisoner was placed in a room filled with several feet of ash. The victim would stand in the ash until exhaustion made them collapse, at which point they would begin breathing in the suffocating ash. Dehydrated and starving, the victim would die of suffocation or hunger over the course of several days. A more terrifying form of ash execution involved a tower. The prisoner would be dropped into a tower partly filled with ash, and paddles connected to wheels outside the tower would stir the ash. The prisoner would inhale the ash, eventually suffocating or dying from heart failure. This method of execution was not only used in ancient Persia, but is also mentioned in historical texts, such as writings from the Bible and Roman historians. Another brutal execution method involved milk and honey. The prisoner would be forced to drink a mixture of both, and then their body would be exposed to the elements in a vat or boat, leaving their head and limbs uncovered. Over time, the victim would suffer from the deadly effects of exposure, eventually succumbing to death. These methods were typically reserved for those who had defied the government or plotted rebellion against the empire. Gruesome execution methods in ancient Persia. The Persian Empire, known for its vast reach and powerful rulers, also became infamous for its horrifying methods of punishment and execution. Among the most chilling was a technique called scaphism, a slow and agonizing form of death that involved the use of milk and honey. Prisoners condemned to this fate were forced to drink a mixture of both and were then placed in a vessel, their exposed skin covered in the sticky substance. Floating in still water, they were at the mercy of biting insects, flies, and maggots. The combination of diarrhea, dehydration, and parasite infestation slowly weakened the victim. Their skin would eventually break down as maggots hatched and feasted on the rotting flesh, causing unbearable pain until death finally arrived. This method could result in death from septic shock, though some scholars question its historical accuracy, as it is largely documented by Herodotus. Another grisly practice involved burying people alive. Herodotus recounts that during King Xerxes' war with Greece, individuals were buried head down in the ground. This horrifying execution method was sometimes employed for religious or punitive purposes. Queen Amestris, wife of Xerxes, allegedly ordered the live burial of 14 Persian noblemen as a sacrifice to the earth gods, believing it would ensure her long life. Some of Herodotus's accounts, such as these, suggest that the killing of living people in such a manner was seen as a way to honor the gods. However, historians remain divided on the authenticity of these claims, as Herodotus provided little to no corroborating evidence. Beyond these terrifying acts, the Persians also used molten metal as a form of punishment, pouring it onto or into the bodies of criminals. This method was part of a broader array of gruesome executions that demonstrated the empire's extreme approach to justice and the lengths to which they would go to maintain control and authority. These methods were reserved for those who posed significant threats to the Persian Empire, especially those who betrayed the kingdom or its rulers. While these practices may seem unimaginable today, they were a dark part of the empire's history, intended to instill fear and maintain order across their vast territories. Persian execution methods: a harsh legacy. The Persian Empire, with its extensive history and complex social structure, employed some of the most gruesome and inventive methods of punishment. Among the most chilling was the use of molten metal. Ancient Zoroastrian texts suggested molten metal could be used as a way to test the purity of a person's soul. If someone was considered pure, the molten metal would supposedly not harm them. But if they were guilty of lies or deceit, it would cause severe injury. While stories of Queen Parashat using molten metal are largely considered myth, other accounts suggest the Persians used molten gold to execute criminals. One famous account tells of King Shapur I of Persia pouring molten gold down the throat of the Roman Emperor Valerian, whom he had captured. However, historians note that this may have been embellished by Roman writers to demonize the Persians. Another brutal punishment involved the use of trees. A story, popularized by British diplomat James Morier in the early 19th century, tells of thieves being tied between two trees that were then pulled apart with ropes. When the ropes were cut, the trees snapped back into position, tearing the victim apart. Though widely believed, there's limited evidence to support the claim, and it is possible that the story arose from cultural misunderstandings. Persian law typically mandated the amputation of hands for thieves rather than execution. Stoning was another common form of execution in ancient Persia, referenced in various ancient texts, including the Old and New Testaments, as well as the writings of Herodotus and Josephus. Victims were either hit with stones or had heavy stones placed on their torsos, gradually increasing the pressure until death. This method was especially used for the lower classes, such as servants and peasants, who were at greater risk of being punished. Stoning was also employed as part of questioning criminals, particularly in cases involving serious accusations. The Persian Empire was not only harsh in its treatment of criminals, but also towards those who rebelled against the state. Rebels were marked by mutilating their ears or noses, or in some cases both, making them recognizable in public. These individuals were then paraded through the streets, humiliated, and left to slowly die, often from exposure or untreated wounds. This served both as a punishment and a warning to others who might consider defying the empire. These methods reflect the extreme nature of Persian justice, which was designed to instill fear and maintain control over its vast and diverse empire. Although the historical accuracy of some of these stories remains debated, they reveal the severity and brutality of punishment in ancient Persia. Public humiliation and brutality in ancient Persia. In the ancient Persian Empire, punishment for criminals was both physical and psychological. Those accused of severe crimes were often led through the streets, chained to gates or posts that marked the boundaries of the city, often in front of the home of a judge or government official. This display of shame was designed to publicly humiliate the offender. The convicted individual could be tortured while chained, and the crowd would be encouraged to join in, further degrading the prisoner both mentally and physically. Often the person who offered water or food to the prisoner would then add to their suffering by kicking, hitting, or cutting them, prolonging the agony until death finally came. Some criminals faced an even more brutal fate, being sent to the king for a more public and gruesome execution. These prisoners were often tortured and killed in full view of the public, with the suffering continuing until the individual finally succumbed. In some cases, prisoners who appeared close to death were briefly released to recuperate, only to endure the torture process again. The Persian Empire also practiced crucifixion as a means of execution, similar to other ancient civilizations like the Romans. However, the Persians' approach differed in that the victim was often tied to a vertical pole rather than nailed to a crossbeam, leading to a slow and agonizing death, often from asphyxiation. Crucifixion was considered one of the most painful and humiliating methods of execution, and once the victim died, their body would frequently be left on display for public viewing, further intensifying the shame and suffering. For the Persians, execution wasn't simply about removing a criminal from society, it was about ensuring that the person's crimes were remembered as a warning to others. Some offenders were even left for nature to take its course, with their decaying bodies serving as a public spectacle. The story of Polycrates of Samos, who was crucified and displayed after his death, is one such example. In addition to physical punishment, Persian folklore contained vivid descriptions of the afterlife, emphasizing the eternal consequences of a wicked life. The belief was that good people would cross a wide, easy bridge to enter heaven, while the wicked would cross a narrow, sharp-edged bridge, where they would inevitably fall into hell. This belief likely influenced the harshness of Persian executions, as those condemned to death not only faced an agonizing end on earth, but were also thought to be doomed to suffer for eternity. These practices demonstrate how the Persian Empire sought not only to punish criminals, but also to deter rebellion and crime through fear, humiliation, and the promise of eternal torment. The combination of physical punishment, public spectacle, and spiritual consequences made Persian justice both brutal and terrifying. In ancient Persia, torture and execution were brutal and often public, designed to prolong suffering. Executioners were skilled in ensuring victims endured prolonged agony, as death too soon could result in punishment for the executioner. One of the most notorious methods was impalement, where victims were placed on sharp stakes, which could take days to kill them. Longitudinal impalement involved the stake being driven through the body, often stopping just short of the heart, while transversal impalement targeted the torso for quicker death, though it could still be agonizing. Another method, anal impalement, involved a blunt stake inserted into the victim's body, who was suspended to prevent slipping down the pole. This method caused prolonged pain as the victim could only kill themselves by pushing down after enduring it for a long time. These executions were carried out publicly to serve as grim warnings, especially for crimes like theft or dishonesty, which were punished by death. Although there were some claims of meat hooks or other devices being used, impalement was the primary method, creating a terrifying display of power and punishment. Although Persian punishments were harsh, much of the negative information about ancient Persia comes from biased sources like Herodotus and Ctesias, whose writings exaggerated certain punishments. Ctesias's portrayal of Persian cruelty was criticized by historians, and more recent scholars have questioned the reliability of these accounts. Some of the most common punishments in Persia, such as whipping or blinding, were not unique to the Persians but were used throughout the ancient world. While Persia had its share of cruel punishments, it was not alone. The ancient Greeks, Romans, and other civilizations also employed brutal methods of punishment, including crucifixion, beheading, and animal attacks. The cruelty of ancient Persia, both real and exaggerated, is similar to the harsh punishments seen throughout history, even in more recent times. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating history content.